I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Make sure to drop your city in the comments. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell will shake you to your core. This isn't just any story, it's a reality that happened on a night when everything went dark, when everything fell apart, and when one single moment changed my life forever. So make sure you watch till the very end, because what you're about to hear isn't just pain, it's a truth that might leave you speechless. You know how some nights feel like they carry a storm in their silence, when the air feels heavier than usual, when the shadows in your room seem too alive, when you sense something terrible is about to happen but you can't explain it to anyone. That's exactly what midnight felt like for me that night, as I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, pretending to be asleep because I couldn't shake the fear that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I heard the faintest creak of the back door, and my heart instantly dropped into my stomach. My stepfather wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't live with us anymore. And yet the sound of his heavy boots across the linoleum told me that the nightmare I had been dreading was now walking straight into my reality. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call out, but my voice felt trapped inside my chest as I pulled the blanket tighter around me, praying it was just my imagination. Then I heard the metallic click of the lock on my bedroom door being forced open, and I knew this was no dream. The handle twisted violently, the wood splintered, and before I could even sit up properly, he was standing in the doorway, his face twisted with rage and alcohol, his fists clenched like weapons. My mom was behind him, her face pale and blank, watching but not stopping him, and in that frozen second I realized I was utterly alone, caught in a nightmare where the people who were supposed to protect me were either the ones hurting me or the ones allowing it. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might explode out of my chest, and I whispered, "Please, don't." But the words barely left my lips before his hand shot forward, grabbing me by the shoulder and yanking me off the bed with such force that pain ripped through my body. The sound of something tearing inside me, a grotesque pop, told me my shoulder had been dislocated, and I collapsed onto the floor with a scream that didn't even sound like my own voice. He loomed over me, shouting words I couldn't process, while my mom stood frozen in the corner, her eyes glassy, her hands trembling but unmoving. Every second stretched into eternity as I struggled to breathe, my body convulsing in agony, the room spinning around me, my mind begging for this to be a nightmare I could wake up from. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was my reality. And in that moment, lying broken on the floor, I felt the cruelest truth pierce me. The people who should have saved me were the ones letting me collapse, the ones watching as I shattered into pieces on the cold, unforgiving ground. The weight of that night didn't just end with the blow or the searing pain in my shoulder. It spread like wildfire through every nerve in my body, a memory that etched itself deeper with each passing second as he raged above me. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, sharp and bitter, burning my nose as he bent down and shouted at me, words that spilled out like venom but blurred together because my brain was too overloaded with pain to process anything clearly. The dislocation had left my arm limp at my side, useless, but he didn't stop. He shoved me again, my back colliding with the edge of the nightstand, the wooden corner digging into my ribs so hard I thought they'd snap. My breath came in broken gasps, and I glanced at my mother, searching her face for some flicker of protection, some spark of maternal instinct that would pull her forward to stop him, but instead, her eyes darted away, as if watching me break was too unbearable. Or maybe as if she had already accepted this violence as part of our existence. That realization was a wound deeper than the physical injuries, because when your own mother chooses silence over saving you, the betrayal cuts sharper than any punch. I felt my throat burn as I tried to plead, to remind her I was her child, but all that came out was a hoarse whimper that barely made it past the chaos. He grabbed me by my hair, jerking my head back so my eyes met his face so close I could see the veins bulging in his forehead, the raw hatred twisting his features, like he needed me to feel smaller, weaker, less than human. My tears blurred everything, but his voice still struck like a hammer. "You think you're better than me? You think you can disrespect me in this house?" Each word was punctuated by the force of his fists, one landing against my jaw, the other against my stomach, driving the air from my lungs until I was choking on nothingness. My body crumpled again, my cheek pressed against the cold floorboards, and I tasted blood pooling in my mouth, metallic and thick. The room swayed, and in that haze, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a beating. This was a breaking. He wasn't satisfied until I was stripped of every ounce of strength, every piece of dignity I had left, and the silent audience of my mother only fueled his power. My mind screamed louder than my voice ever could. How could she let this happen? How could she stand there as I collapsed, shattered, begging in silence for her to pull me back from the abyss? And yet she didn't move, not even a step closer, as though her stillness was the price she had agreed to pay for peace in her own fractured world. The betrayal pressed heavier than his fists, and with every strike I sank deeper into the despair of knowing I had no one that I was fighting for. My survival alone, in a place that should have been my sanctuary. The minutes dragged like hours, every sound, every strike, every shallow breath magnified by the helplessness that consumed me, until I no longer knew if I could endure another second. Time became distorted that night, stretching and twisting in ways that made it impossible to know if seconds or hours were passing, because every moment was consumed by the sound of his rage and the weight of my own helplessness. My body screamed with pain, but my mind screamed louder, caught between the instinct to fight back and the crushing knowledge that resistance would only make him hit harder. I tried to curl into myself, to shield my head with my good arm, but he kicked my legs out from under me, leaving me sprawled like a broken doll across the floor. The pain in my shoulder throbbed so violently, it felt as if my entire body was pulsing around that one dislocated joint, and each movement made it worse, like fire spreading through my nerves. I begged inside my head for it to stop, for someone, anyone, to intervene, but the silence of the house outside my room was deafening. As though the world had turned its back on me, my mom's presence in the corner burned in my mind. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't powerless. She was my mother, and yet she just stood there, her hands clutched together, her lips pressed tight, her eyes glazed like she had willed herself into another place to avoid facing what was happening right in front of her. That abandonment hollowed me in ways I couldn't describe, because even though I had endured his cruelty before, there had always been a sliver of hope that if things got too bad, she would stop him. But that night, that hope died, suffocated by her stillness, and in its place grew a raw, searing clarity. I was on my own. His hand struck across my face again, and the sting shot down my jaw, making my ears ring until I could barely hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. I felt the taste of iron flood my mouth again, blood dripping onto the floorboards, staining the wood with evidence of my pain. He shouted about respect, about obedience, about how I needed to learn my place, but all I heard was the voice of a man so broken himself that the only way he knew how to feel powerful was by crushing someone weaker. That thought flickered in my mind even as I gasped for breath, and in that flicker was a strange kind of defiance, a quiet whisper reminding me that his violence was not a reflection of my worth but of his emptiness. Still, that realization did little to ease the terror that consumed me, because realization doesn't stop fists, and it doesn't stop a mother from choosing silence. The walls of my room, once familiar, now felt like a prison closing in, each shadow mocking me, each corner offering no escape. I wanted to disappear, to slip through the floorboards and vanish where his hands couldn't reach, but instead I was trapped in the raw, unbearable reality of his power. My breaths came shallow and sharp, every inhale catching against the pain in my ribs, every exhale trembling with fear, and though my body was breaking, my mind clung desperately to one thought. If I survived this night, I would never allow myself to be this helpless again. That thought burned faintly beneath the overwhelming fear, a small ember buried in the ashes of my strength, but it was there, and even as he towered over me, even as my mom's eyes refused to meet mine, I held on to that ember, because it was the only thing that told me I hadn't been completely destroyed. The floor was cold against my cheek, grounding me in the middle of a storm I couldn't control. And I remember thinking how strange it was that something as simple as the texture of wood could feel more real than the chaos raining down on me. Every kick, every strike blurred together, but that tiny detail, the grain of the wood beneath my skin, anchored me, whispering that I was still alive, even as my body begged to give out. My shoulder screamed with a pain so sharp it made my vision blur in and out, and with every attempt to shift, I felt the joint grind unnaturally, reminding me how broken I already was. My stepfather's voice was a constant roar above me, slurred and venomous, demanding my submission, demanding my silence, demanding I accept his violence as law. And yet, beneath the ringing in my ears and the pounding in my chest, I found myself fixating on my mother's stillness. She wasn't just in the room, she was part of the scene, part of the reason the blows kept coming. Her silence was like fuel to his fire, an unspoken permission that told him he could keep going because no one would stop him. That betrayal dug deeper than any bruise could reach. My mind twisted, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some excuse for her inaction. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought intervening would make it worse, but the longer she stood there, frozen, the harder it was to believe any of those excuses. Her eyes met mine once, just once, and in that fleeting second I begged her silently, begged with everything inside me, for her to move, to protect me, to remind me that I wasn't alone. But she dropped her gaze, and that was the moment. Something in me cracked in a way that could never be undone. It wasn't just my body collapsing under his fists, it was my faith in her. My belief that somewhere in her heart I mattered enough to fight for. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with blood, and each sob felt like a confession that I had finally understood. I was not safe in my own home. Not with him, and not even with her. That realization terrified me in ways the pain never could, because physical wounds eventually heal, but the wound of being unwanted, unprotected, unseen, that's a wound that festers in the soul. My breaths grew more ragged, my ribs aching, my vision dimming around the edges as if my body was preparing to shut down to escape what my mind couldn't. His rage didn't falter. His strikes relentless, but somewhere in the chaos, I stopped, hearing him clearly, his words muffling like echoes underwater, as if my body and mind were retreating inward to protect what little remained of me. The room seemed distant, detached, and I clung to that detachment like a lifeline, because it was the only thing keeping me from drowning in despair. Still, even in that haze, one truth pressed against me with merciless weight. I had collapsed, broken on the floor, and my own mother had watched, unmoving, as if my suffering were nothing more than another secret to be buried in the silence of midnight. Somewhere, in the endless beating, something inside me shifted, not my bones or my skin, but a deeper fracture, a split in the way I saw the world and the people in it. Pain had a way of stripping everything down, peeling away illusions until only truth remained, and as I lay there trembling, barely able to move, the truth hit me harder than his fists ever could. I had been abandoned in the very place I was supposed to feel safe. That realization was like ice flooding through me, colder than the blood soaking into my shirt, colder than the draft seeping through the broken frame of my bedroom door. I remember clutching at the floor with my good hand, my fingernails scraping against the wood as though I could claw my way out of the moment. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from the reality pressing down on me. My stepfather wasn't just punishing me, he was claiming power, stamping his control into my body with every blow, and the silence of my mother was his accomplice. It was as if her stillness whispered to him that I wasn't worth saving, that my cries didn't matter, that I could be broken without consequence. My mind spun in circles, trying to process, trying to hold on to fragments of hope. But each time I looked at her, each time her eyes slid away from mine, another piece of hope shattered. I thought of all the moments in my childhood when I had believed her hugs meant safety, when I had believed her words meant love, and suddenly those memories felt like lies, illusions I had been clinging to because I needed to believe someone was on my side. Now, under the weight of his violence, those illusions crumbled, and I felt a hollow emptiness where comfort used to live. The pain in my shoulder had become a constant scream, each movement sending lightning bolts through my body, and I could barely lift my head anymore. My breaths came shallow, each inhale sharp, each exhale a desperate attempt to stay conscious, because I knew if I slipped under, if I lost myself in the darkness tugging at the edges of my vision, he might not stop. A part of me wondered if he wanted me unconscious, if he wanted proof of his power painted across my limp body, but the larger part of me just wanted to survive, just wanted to keep that faint ember of defiance alive long enough to escape this nightmare. My thoughts tangled with memories of better days, of laughter, of times before he came into our lives, when the world hadn't yet taught me how cruel it could be, and those memories felt like ghosts mocking me with what I had lost. My tears soaked the floor, hot against my bruised cheek, and I wanted to scream until the walls shattered, until someone outside heard, but my voice was broken, my throat raw from sobbing and begging. He towered above me, still shouting, still hurling, words like weapons, but they blurred together, meaningless against the backdrop of betrayal that screamed louder in my heart. And all the while, my mother remained still, Her silence the loudest sound in the room, her betrayal the deepest wound of all. My body eventually gave up resisting, not because I wanted to surrender, but because there was nothing left in me to fight with. Every nerve felt scorched, every bone heavy, and my vision flickered like a dying light bulb, dimming and flaring in uneven bursts. I remember lying there, my cheeks still pressed to the floor, listening to the chaotic rhythm of his rage, the stomping of his boots, the harsh intake of his breaths, the spit of his words that felt less like language and more like fire. And still, even through the haze, even through the splitting ache in my shoulder and the pulsing in my ribs, I was aware of her. My mother. She had not left. She had not screamed. She had not shielded me. She was there, in the corner, her outline trembling in my blurred vision, but she might as well have been miles away because she did nothing. That nothingness carved itself into me with more permanence than his violence. It told me I wasn't worth stepping forward for. It told me her fear, her loyalty, or her weakness, whatever it was stronger than her love for me. That knowledge hollowed me out until I felt like a shell, a body going through the motions of pain while my soul tried desperately to retreat somewhere untouched. I wanted to close my eyes and vanish, but fear kept them open. Fear that if I slipped into unconsciousness, I would never wake again. His words cut through the ringing in my ears, fragments about how useless I was, how I needed to learn obedience, how I had no place in this house unless I bent to his will. Each sentence wrapped chains tighter around me, but somewhere deep, in a place untouched by fists, a voice whispered back, no matter what he said, I still existed. I still had a pulse, a thought, a fragment of will that he couldn't take, not fully. That whisper was small, fragile, but it was the only shield I had left. My tears slowed, not because the pain lessened, but because I had cried everything out, and what remained was a quiet resolve buried beneath exhaustion. My breaths rattled in my chest, uneven and weak, and I thought about how much my life had shrunk to this one room, this one night, this one moment of survival. I wondered if anyone would ever know the truth of what happened here, if anyone would believe me if I told them. I wondered if she, my mother, would ever face the memory of standing there while her child collapsed under his blows. Those questions circled me, heavy and unanswerable. As his rage finally began to slow, his movements less frantic, his shouting fading into mutters, he stood over me one last time, spit hitting the floor near my face, his eyes wild but tired, and then he turned away, leaving me crumpled in my own blood and silence. The door banged against the wall as he stormed out, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my shallow breathing and the deafening silence of my mother's presence. She didn't rush to me, didn't cradle me, didn't even say my name. She just lingered, like a ghost caught between choices, until finally she stepped closer, her shadow falling across my broken body. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. Get up. 2 words, hollow and cold, that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't her child in that moment. I was her burden, her shame, her silence. And as I struggled to move, to push myself up despite the agony tearing through my shoulder, I realized I could never look at her the same way again. Something fundamental had snapped, and no matter how many mornings came after this night, the fracture would remain. I don't know how long I stayed on that floor after he left, my body shaking with the aftermath of violence, my mind suspended somewhere between numbness and despair. The room smelled of sweat, blood, and splintered wood, the air thick with the memory of what had just happened, and every attempt to move sent shockwaves through my broken body. My shoulder dangled uselessly at my side, swollen and grotesquely out of place, and I couldn't stop the tears that slid silently down my cheeks, even though my voice was gone, strangled into silence. My mother hovered near the doorway, arms crossed as if to protect herself, but from what? From me. From the truth. She didn't look at me. Not really. She looked through me, like I was something inconvenient she wished wasn't there, and that cut deeper than any wound. I wanted her to kneel, to hold me, to tell me she was sorry, but instead, she stood as though I were the problem she couldn't fix, as though my suffering was a noise she was trying to block out. When I finally gathered the strength to push myself up, leaning against the bed frame for support, the world tilted violently, and I almost collapsed again. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat, and I spat blood onto the floor, watching it stain the wood in ugly, undeniable proof of what had been done to me. She muttered something about not waking the neighbors, about keeping quiet, and in that instant I realized she was more concerned with the world outside than with the child in front of her. That revelation settled over me like a final, suffocating blanket. I had no protector here, no safe space, no love that outweighed fear. As I stumbled toward the bathroom, clutching the wall for balance, every step a battle, I felt pieces of myself scattering, pieces I knew I would never get back. In the mirror, my reflection was almost unrecognizable: swollen cheek, split lip, hollow eyes staring back at me with a mixture of pain and something else, something harder. That was the moment the ember inside me flared. Amid the bruises and the brokenness, a vow was born. I would survive this. I would not let him or her silence define the rest of my life. My body was battered, my heart betrayed, but I was still here, still breathing, still alive. And if I could make it through this night, then one day I would stand stronger than the pain that tried to destroy me. I would not collapse forever. The scars would remain, carved deep into both my skin and my soul, but they would tell a story, not of defeat, but of survival. I looked into my own eyes, and though they were bloodshot and wet with tears, I saw something neither of them could take away: resilience. That night was the end of something, the end of believing in their love, the end of trusting in safety where none existed, but it was also the beginning of something else, something born out of fire and blood and silence. It was the beginning of me deciding that one day, no matter how long it took, I would rise from that floor stronger, louder, and unbreakable.